Welcome to Chamber Exchange, a TV show. My name is Tim Murray, President and CEO of the Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce. And Chamber Exchange is a conversation with our guests and with you, our viewers, about issues impacting the economy of Central Mass, job creation and economic development. And we couldn't have a better guest today in that regard. But before we introduce him, I want to thank our sponsors, Fallon Health, for their support in helping make this show happen. And I also want to acknowledge Worcester Bravehearts Baseball, who just wrapped up another great season. We're not able to three-peat, but they provide baseball fans from throughout the region a great summer. I want to thank the Creedon family, all of the staff and the players of Worcester Bravehearts Baseball for that. My guest, and I'm thrilled to have him for the entire show because there's a lot to talk about as it relates to the United States, Massachusetts, and Canada. But our guest today is the Consul General for New England from Canada, David Alward. Welcome.
Thanks, Tim. Really pleased to be here today.
Well, just to give our viewers a little background on you, you were the Premier of New Brunswick, and for people who might not be familiar with the governance in Canada, that would be the equivalent to a governor here in Massachusetts.
For sure.
And a few different career paths along the way?
Absolutely. So actually, I was born in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Mom and Dad were going to university down here. I was born in Beverly, spent a total of 7 months here. But if we think about the relationship between Canada and the U.S., and especially with New England, a lot of people like me, they say 35% of New Englanders have some sort of Canadian roots. So a long history both from a family perspective, but very importantly culturally as well. I actually went to, did my primary and secondary school in Canada, came back to the U.S., did my post-secondary education in the U.S., and then went back home and have done a number of things over the year. Background is in counseling, economic development work, that type of thing. Operate a little family farm as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And spent a bunch of time in the legislature like you did.
Yeah, yeah.
16 years, and finally was Premier, which is a phenomenal experience.
Yeah, and been the Consul General now for
A year.
A
year was arrived the end of June last year. So the consulate is actually based in Boston, but we're responsible for 5 of the 6 New England states. And it's really a lot like when you think about embassies. Canada and the U.S. have embassies in Washington and in Ottawa. But because of the size of the relationship, we have consulates. Canada has, I believe, 12 consulates across the U.S., and I act like an ambassador for the New England states on behalf of Canada.
Right, and I can tell you, having had the privilege in my previous role as Lieutenant Governor to work with various Consul Generals in the short period of time here, that you've been, not just for Massachusetts, but New England, you've covered an incredible amount of ground, and that probably has something to do with you having been a governor or a premier in Canada. You got to touch all the bases and all the constituencies, so you've had an impact in a short period of time already. But you mentioned, Massachusetts, New England, 35% having some level of French-Canadian history, but and I think I've shared with you, but for our viewers who might be interested, the single largest ethnic background claimed in Worcester County is French-Canadian.
Absolutely.
So it's got roots here, but it's not just about roots in history, and we're going to get a chance to talk about the significance of the relationship between Massachusetts and Canada as it relates to trade and things.
Absolutely. Historically, many Eastern Canadians especially came down. If we think about the Industrial Revolution and what took place here in the mills, whether textile mills or wood mills, et cetera, many of those people that worked in the mills originated from our part of Canada. Today, we see a very close relationship again. The trade that takes place between New England and Canada, just in Massachusetts alone, accounts for more than 200,000 jobs in Massachusetts. So trade is truly bilateral, is something I guess that I like to say. Things that are made, whether it's in Canada or in the U.S., create jobs in both places, which is unlike any other trading relationship. And I think it's something that allows both countries to have prosperity.
Yeah, absolutely. Just, some of the data in Massachusetts alone, 219 Canadian companies operating here in Massachusetts, as you said, providing, lots of direct jobs, indirect jobs, which are meaningful. And also, last year, I believe, was election season in Canada. This year is election season, and there's a lot of talk about trade and international trade and good deals and bad deals. But I think in all of that conversation, which we'll leave to the candidates, I think sometimes people don't recognize, or maybe even the public at large, of the United States and Canada and Massachusetts, biggest trading partner.
Oh, by far. And so, for Massachusetts, 13% of everything that you sell to foreign entities would go to Canada, but it doesn't really speak to what does that really mean. So if Canada, as an example, exports something to Massachusetts, let's say a widget, everybody likes to talk about widgets. On average, 25% of the components of those widgets originated here first. So it created jobs here before it ever created jobs in Canada. And so that trade that takes place, whether it's in goods that we can feel like manufacturing, the tech and biopharma sectors, as an example, that are really important here now as well, or services like finance. Those jobs are created on both sides of the border, and because of that, our citizens have had a quality of life that very few other nations actually have experienced. And without that trade and commerce, neither of our countries would have that same level of opportunity for people to go to work. And I think, sometimes it's easy to say, oh, somebody's gotten a better deal or not. Right. What's important, I think, is when we look at the facts, it's generated opportunity for both of us. And what we've got to focus on, I think, is what is good for the U.S., certainly, and what's good for Canada.
Yeah, you were kind enough, again, I mentioned how, in a short period of time, you've really hit the ground running, but this past year, you were kind enough to come and speak to the Chamber and our Business and Government Forum and meet with another number of Chamber member businesses. And in the aftermath, I kind of wrote an op-ed to kind of reinforce and just the impact of the relationship. But I just think some of the statistics are really significant for people to hear. Canada's #1 customer. Annually, $3.1 billion in goods are exported from Massachusetts, and $7.6 billion are imported from Canada. So just what you talked about in that widget example. And then the most recent figures, I believe in 2015, Massachusetts exported more than $2.2 billion of product to Canada. Yeah. So just the magnitude.
For sure. And just to give you an example, the fish sector, seafood, I'm a former Minister of Fisheries and Agriculture in New Brunswick, and even there's about $1 billion worth of seafood that's exported to Massachusetts a year. But the reality is, much of that doesn't stop in Massachusetts, and Massachusetts actually turns around and value adds or grows the economy here because of that. So that just kind of speaks a little bit to what actually takes place. When you think about the trade between our two nations, Canada buys more from the U.S. than China, Japan, and Great Britain combined, okay?
Can you say that one more time? I want people to hear this. I want to just, again, hear it.
Canada buys more from the U.S. than China, Japan, Great Britain, and you can almost add Germany into that combined. As well, combined. So we buy more from the U.S. than all of the European Union combined. So it's a huge impact that, because we're so close neighbors, and a lot of people don't even think of, many Canadians live along the border. A lot of us don't even realize sometimes that we're two separate nations.
Right.
But the fact is, we benefit each other very importantly, not only from a trade perspective, also from a security perspective.
Yeah.
We're each other's closest allies and neighbors.
I asked you to repeat not once but twice the significance of U.S. and Canadian trade, and you had shared, with me and our viewers that Canadians purchase more annually than Canada. I want to make sure I get this. Canada, Japan, Great Britain, and perhaps Germany.
China.
How could I?
China, Japan, Great Britain, and almost all of Germany's purchases as well. So it's, when you think about the size of the trading relationship, it's huge. Just a bit shy of $1 trillion a year between our two nations. And when you add investment into it, it's about $1.5 trillion, although those are numbers that it's hard to actually get my head around. But what that actually means is it's jobs throughout Massachusetts, it's jobs throughout New England associated with that trade that we both do with each other.
And again, to take a step back on that, we hear so much conversations about, TPP and Europe and China and all, in the public square, but it's important not to take for granted that relationship, the significance of it. And then we've got two countries that are stable democracies that share so much in common, that there's always opportunities to even to build that more.
Sure.
And we're going to talk about one component of that, and perhaps our third segment on electricity and power. But when you have trade of that size and magnitude, you also have security issues. And recently, you invited a number of chamber leaders up for a kind of a 48-hour tour of, and a component of that focused on the level of detail and cooperation that exists between the United States and Canada on border security, on making sure that we're shipping things safely, goods and materials.
Right, and so a lot of work goes on between, if we think about Ottawa and Washington, our capitals, but to look at ensuring that each other can have confidence that we call it the North American perimeter, is safe. 9/11 impacted us all, and if we think of what took place on that day, I know I certainly can remember where I was at the moment that I heard about it. Hundreds of planes were diverted to Canada, and again, Canada accepted and cared for U.S. citizens during that time period. And the work that we do collectively today to ensure that the U.S. is safe, and very importantly, Canada is safe, is good for both of us. And it allows our people to travel back and forth, families to be united, connected, very importantly, goods and services to move back and forth as well. But we work very hard together to make sure that both of our nations are safe and secure. The other piece that's important that a lot of people glaze over a little bit maybe with it, but sometimes the regulations that we have, they mean well, but they actually hurt doing business.
Complicate things on both sides,
for
in
sure.
Ottawa and DC.
For sure.
Yeah.
So there's actually work that's going on right now. It's called RCC, between our two nations, trying to find ways that we can harmonize regulations when it makes sense to allow goods and services to be able to, and people to flow, but at the same time ensuring safety and protection for the public as well.
Yeah, incredibly important, and that's happening. That conversation on, from, both in terms of road travel, maritime travel, ports, exchange at airports, on all different levels.
And really, like if I look at the work that you do as a Chamber of Commerce and the leadership that takes place here, one of the things that I do when I'm out on the ground talking to business leaders are trying to find out what are the regulations out there that you find that are hindering you being able to efficiently or effectively do business. Sometimes there's a very good reason for them. Other times there may not be. So those are things that we can certainly shoot up the flagpole, if you want to call it that, to have a look at to see what types of things, maybe there is another area that we need to be doing some focus. So Chambers of Commerce, as an example, provide a very good point of contact for being able to feed information about what's going on the ground.
All right, and I think we all really kind of enjoyed that trip and to get that level of detail and then be able to maybe help our members in that regard, as you just said.
Sure.
The other element of this kind of economic, mutually beneficial economic relationship between Massachusetts, Canada, the United States, and Canada is travel and tourism. And again, some data. Travel and tourism In 2015, approximately 886,300 Canadians visited Massachusetts and spent $365 million, and Massachusetts residents spent $720 million in that same year traveling to Canada. Again, just one state, a huge impact both ways.
Huge, and for me, I won't say who I root for hockey, but you can bet there are lots of Canadians come down to watch the Bruins play. I'm going to a Red Sox game on Monday. Lots of Canadians love the Red Sox and come down, etc. So again, or down to the beaches or down to the Cape, whatever it happens to be, Western Mass. Again, it's all part of that doing business, and we both benefit when there's that type of opportunity.
Right, and in this conversation, you mentioned on the security and border, and part of this conversation is how do you make the flow easier, but at the same time safe, so that people that are traveling can do it in a convenient but safe way.
So one of the things that the two nations are working on are things like pre-clearance. So when people are flying, that the U.S. Customs agents are actually able to be on Canadian soil to check them when they're coming into the U.S. So again, it allows people to move more freely through the system. So there are already some places that are up and running already. There's work that's going on between the two nations to see that expanded. So that's an example of the types of things that we're working on together to improve the experience, the opportunity, ensure safety and security at the same time, so that our countries.
And you had mentioned, in the last segment, your time as Minister of Fisheries and Agriculture, and just curious, as you come to New England, Massachusetts, and just in Worcester County alone, we've got more farms in Worcester County than any other county in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. But sometimes people see Massachusetts and New England very Boston-centric. Just curious on your experience around Massachusetts and around New England in terms of that urban-rural piece, the fisheries aspect, which is a big part of the economy here in Massachusetts as well.
It sure is. Excuse me. I think that same dichotomy that is going on here is happening back home in Canada as well, where there's that rural-urban dynamic that's taking place. Certainly have had a chance to visit a few farms since I've been down here because of the interest that I have. I've got a little purebred beef operation back home. And I think one of the things I do miss, because I live in really urban Boston area, is that connectivity. So when I have a chance to go out and visit, it's something I take quite serious, actually. One of the interesting things, I think one of the big concerns down here is the impact of the lack of rain this year, and what, we'll see what the impact is on the farm gate here over the next few months. But it's agriculture is something that is certainly still, I think, very, very closely part of us, who we are as Canadians, as Americans. And I think we're reconnecting to where our food comes, very importantly, whether it's back home or here as well. And so it's something that I think is really, really interesting. The other thing I would say, too, is that I'm seeing is more and more that whole connection with innovation that's going on, whether it's thinking about biopharma and different foods or the fisheries and opportunities to play a role there. Important as well, techniques that allow farmers to be more efficient, or provide better crops long term as well. So there's a lot of work going on in New England and certainly in Canada as well on that side of it that I see.
And we've covered a lot, really underscoring the significance of the relationship between the United States and Canada, economically, culturally. But another piece of this, which is so important and will become increasingly important, is energy. When we listen to our members at the Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce, the single biggest issue is that we hear from our members, regardless of the size of the company or the sector they're in, is workforce talent and pipeline. But in that top 3 or 4 is energy costs. And Governor Baker just recently signed legislation that the Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce supported and advocated for, which he described as kind of a combo platter that builds on some of the the work that Governor Patrick and the administration I was a part of, looking
Absolutely.
at hydro, looking at renewables, using fossil fuel like natural gas as a bridge fuel till we get to that full renewable future we all aspire for. But a big piece of that is hydro, and that comes from Canada. And maybe you could share for our viewers the significance and what Canada's been able to do in terms of hydro.
Sure. So if you look at Canada as a nation, about 70% of our electricity grid as a nation actually comes from hydroelectricity. 80% of our grid is non-emitting. So when you think about other renewables like wind, nuclear, et cetera. So we're very blessed as a nation when it comes to resources. And if you think of our proximity between Eastern Canada and New England, and our interconnectivity that we already have, our electricity grids and things like pipelines are already existent. It makes great sense when we have an abundance of resources to be able to provide them to a region that has some of the highest energy costs in the U.S., some of the most volatile, energy costs in the U.S. as well, because ultimately that impacts jobs here, and you've seen, I think we've all seen too many jobs leave New England for the southern U.S. as an example, and one of the big reasons that people quote is around energy costs.
Right.
So what that electricity, what it's going to mean this bill will allow is the utilities will be able to enter into long-term contracts for access to Canadian hydro and onshore wind. What that means is Canadian companies will compete through a RFP process. So that's great news for Massachusetts, because that means you're going to get good value because you'll have competition.
And working with some of the other New England governors
Absolutely.
and kind of, to kind of enhance the kind of purchasing power and hopefully competitive rate. And you can't underscore it enough. I mean, we've talked about the relationship at so many different levels, but you've got that predictability. You don't have the volatility that when we rely on oil and resources from other countries that may not be friendly to the U.S. or democracies. It just makes sense on so many levels. And I my first term as Lieutenant Governor, had a chance to go up to the province of Quebec and get briefed. And the statistic still boggles my mind. And you talked about the country, 70% coming from renewables on the grid being generated. But in the province of Quebec, it's like
over 95%.
95% of people's and businesses' energy comes from renewables.
Right. So, and when we look at needing to deal with things like climate change, we believe that hydropower is it's a great energy source because it's clean, number one, it's affordable, and very importantly, it's reliable. So when you think about wind and solar, they're important resources for the future. But the wind doesn't blow 24/7. The sun doesn't shine 24/7.
Here in Worcester it does.
Oh, absolutely. Blue sky all the time.
Right.
But what hydro is able to do is really backstop the other renewables going forward in the future. So it'll give a level of confidence to people like businesses long-term to invest. And it's also great for the environment and dealing with the issues that we have to face on climate change as well.
And there may be a viewer out there asking a question. Look, Canada's a big country. United States. Is there enough capacity? Is there sufficient capacity in the hydro to not only power Canada, literally and figuratively, but extend to New England and New York State?
Absolutely. And one of the great things I think that you'll see with the RFP process when it comes forward, there are a number of companies, a number of provinces that have resources. So what I hope to see is competition, which means that's great for the Massachusetts consumers at the end of the day.
No, without a doubt. And I think that legislation now that's been signed has been debated, for several years, 3 or 4 years now. But having it completed, I think it's important for us and kind of presents a real opportunity.
It is great. I guess one of the things, again, coming from Eastern Canada, it's an opportunity for us to look, I think, as a greater region. Very often, we think about maybe Massachusetts independently, New Brunswick independently, et cetera. But the reality is Eastern Canada and New England and quite frankly New York, we're all interconnected. And I think if we look at things differently, we'll all gain from it long term. Actually, the New England governors and the Eastern Canadian premiers are part of an organization called NEGCP, and they're getting together over the coming days. And energy and the environment will be a very important thing that they'll be talking about, along with innovation. And we look at, the miracle that is Massachusetts in innovation and the jobs and the opportunity that's created because of the great universities that you have, the research that goes on, and then the commercialization into opportunities as well. That's another area where I think we're doing a lot of things already, but we can do more as we go forward.
And just to build on the innovation piece, specifically some of the opportunities, we know in Canada, and it's something that's important here in Central Mass, between Becker College and WPI, we have one of the largest clusters in video and digital gaming. That is a huge and emerging industry in Canada. We're well established already.
Absolutely. If you think about the Montreal region, it's a world-class leader when it comes to digital gaming and that type of cluster. Vancouver is another area, New Brunswick and Halifax, there's a growing cluster there. And the opportunity really for a corridor, if you want to call it, between this region and Montreal, as an example, is great.
Well, we're going to have you back to talk about that soon. But we're running out of time, but a great show. Thank you for being with us.